This Choircast podcast is brought to you by the Quantum Gospel of Mary and the Lost Gospel of Truth by Keith Giles. For nearly 2,000 years, Mary Magdalene has endured attempts to erase her from the Gospel of John, suppression of her gospel text, and even false allegations by the 6th century Pope of being a prostitute. In this new book, author Keith Giles reveals the truth about Mary's gospel message and restores her prominence as the apostle to the apostles. Available now on Amazon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Not Church. As Nat always says, if it was church, you would have left by now. But I don't know. I might be able to try to convince you to stay, and maybe that can change your mind today. My name is Bethany. I'm here with John. You want to say hi, John?
Hi, John.
And Nat is traveling to Dallas right now, so he is not with us today, but he'll be back on with us next week. But we have a wonderful guest with us today. As always, we have Cara Meredith. She is an author and a freelance writer. She's a public theologian, and she just came out with a new book called Church Camp: Bad Skits, Cry Night, and How White Evangelicalism Betrayed a Generation. We're going to talk about that today. But she also wrote a book called The Color of Life, A Journey Toward Love and Racial Justice that came out in 2019. Cara is passionate about issues of justice, race, and privilege. She holds a master's of theology from Fuller Seminary, and she's a postulant for holy orders in the Episcopal Church. With a background in education and nonprofit work, she wears more hats than she probably ought, as most moms do, but mostly just enjoys playing with words a lot. She has been featured in national media outlets such as the Oregonian, the New York Times, the Living Church, the Christian Century, Baptist News Global, among others, and she lives with her family in the Bay Area. So welcome, Cara. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you. So excited to be with both of you.
Good. This is awesome. Have we had you on the podcast before, or is this your first time on this podcast?
I don't think so. I think this is MFT, my first time. I'm very excited.
Yay. I'm newer to the podcast too. So there are some people who have been on before that I just am learning for the first time. So it's really great to have you here. One of the questions we like to ask our guests, especially the first time they're here, is just to give an update of your faith background. Yeah, like what brought you to this moment, and what was it like growing up, if you grew up in the church?
I grew up in the American Baptist tradition, and my dad was a PK, the son of an American Baptist preacher. So our faith was very important to us. Grew up going to church every Sunday, every Wednesday. I think my parents were the key head volunteers for nearly everything, for the kids choir and for the yearly dramatic skits around Easter Sunday, for all these different things. They sang in the choir also. So we just kind of lived at church. And I then became really involved with Young Life when I was in high school, which is a parachurch ministry. And then just became really involved in different forms of ministry, really for the rest of my life, and all within or under kind of that umbrella of white evangelicalism. And that was my life for a long time. And it was until it wasn't, until I just began to discover new sides of who God is, and eventually came to find a home in the Episcopal tradition.
Wow. Well, how long ago did you become Episcopalian?
So I was officially dunked, which that's kind of a joke because Episcopalians don't actually dunk when it comes to the sacrament of baptism. But I was officially sprinkled in 2018. So even though I was literally dunked as a Baptist when I was a young girl, probably around age 9 or 10, then really 30 years later, that's when I officially became an Episcopalian. And am now, the fancy word for postulant is someone who's in the ordination process. So someone who's going to become a priest. So that is part of my process of where I am now.
Wow.
That's great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what kind of role do you see yourself playing as you continue forth in the church?
That is the question of the hour. I don't necessarily feel like I'm called to super traditional church ministry. I would love to do something that is more hybrid. I want to keep writing. I dream of being a priest and a writer, however that looks. There are a lot of Episcopalians who do chaplaincy work. I love the idea of chaplaincy work in the sense that it is being out. It's being with people out in the world. But I also just love showing up and delivering the good news and preaching on a Sunday morning. So I just sit here and go, oh, well, maybe I am going to be at a little parish, or maybe I'm not. I don't really know. I sit here and go, I don't know. I don't understand. And I'm still in the process, which means that I haven't been kicked out and I haven't left it yet. So it's still, I'm still there.
Nice. I love that. I love that you are still open to whatever is going to happen. You're like, it seems like you've got this open path ahead of you that could look all sorts of different ways. And I don't know, it's just really refreshing to see that. So often people just have this very clear ideal of what they are expecting, how they want it to come about. And I mean, you have children and preteens, and there's just a reality that we have to be flexible in these years. So it's beautiful that you're kind of stepping into a space of flexibility, but you're still able to preach every once in a while, and you're still obviously writing incredible work. And so what does your your day look like? Like, do you find a lot of time to write, or how does that even fit in your schedule?
So funny you should ask. As you did just read in my bio, I wear more hats than I probably ought to be wearing. I actually have 2 part-time jobs. I call them pay the mortgage jobs, because that's what they do, is they pay the mortgage. So those jobs are both in the nonprofit development sphere, which is where I am right now. And again, that's what allows me oftentimes to preach and write. So I don't think that I'll be doing this forever too. But I also go, at some point, I should maybe settle down and stop being such a flighty, being so flighty vocationally. But I think I am just finding my way there. But for the most part, I work those 2 jobs Monday through Thursday. They're very flex hours, but I work those 2 jobs Monday through Thursday, and then Friday is my main writing day. Right now we're recording this podcast. I'm on the tail end of the first 2 months after the book released. And so I've been preaching every Sunday at different churches in the Bay Area. I had a weekend in Oregon, a weekend in Washington. So I'm almost done. I have 2 more weekends of preaching. And then I'm taking July off, of which I am just terribly delighted about. So right now, writing to me, there's not a whole lot. And part of that has to do with the season of the book. So when Fridays happen, or sometimes I write at night, a lot of it right now is simply I'm in the promotion time. But I am still I'm writing on Substack. I'm writing occasional freelance articles. I'm obviously writing a sermon every week. So this is the point in which it's like, okay, I probably should slow down at some point. And I will, and that is what July is for. But it's also, I think for me, I just thought, well, I'm not creating anything right now during this promotional piece. It's just getting, or time or season. It's about getting the word out about the book.
About the book, what made you decide to write a book on church camp? I mean, what was the ultimate decision on this?
Yeah, that is the question of the hour, of which I have a couple of different answers for. Yeah. But I will say this. So as we talked about beforehand, my first book came out in 2019. And then we had this thing that hit the world called the pandemic. Perhaps both of you remember it. Or you've completely just, pushed it aside.
Disassociated.
And it's disassociated with the whole, with that time period. But for me, that time period really, there was this, it was hard. And I remember going, okay, I need to find something to write. I need to find a new book to write. And I remember just being struck by the idea that in a singular moment, two things could be true at the same time, as in two opposite things could be true. And you'd have this one moment in time and there would be so much joy, and literally like you turn the ball over and there would just be so much pain. So you'd have these opposite emotions or tensions, or just examples, realities that were alive within the same moment. Long story short, I wrote a whole proposal and a quarter of a book that paired all these disparate words together, these opposite words, into essays. And my agent and I went and tried to sell this book of essays, and all of the editors said, wow, we love this idea of two things being true at the same time, but we don't like the idea of all these essays. You are not a world famous author, and they're not going to sell. That was kind of the bottom line, whether or not you want to delete that from the conversation. But they said, but we love the through line of paradox. So where in your life have you experienced that tension of two things being true at the same time? Is there one example? And so that was where and how Church Camp was birthed. And this was a couple of years ago now, but as I thought back on my life, and I'm a spiritual memoirist, that's kind of the heart of my writing, even if there's a lot of theology and journalism that gets thrown in there. As I thought about my life and really my spiritual journey, that's when it just hit me. I was like, it's Church Camp. That is the place of my fondest memories and the deepest parts of my identity. And it is the place that I don't know if I can send my own kids to. It is the place in which I recognize the harm that was caused. And again, for me, it was within a particular subset or environment of church camp, being white evangelical church camps.
I mean, I would agree with you. I have great memories of church camp. But I don't know if I would. Well, my kids are now all adults, but when they were younger, I would not have sent them to church camp because of some of the harder and more not too cool things that happened in church camp. And it's a lot of what you talk about in your book, and being also from a church camp that was white evangelical. I completely understand where you're coming from on this book. But what I do appreciate is, and I read a couple of reviews on your book, and one of them was, I think the headline of the review was "Not My Experience," and I was like, but what I got from you in your book is a lot of love of church camp. I mean, you don't come at it from a place of hate at all. You come from a place of, this was a place that I absolutely loved, and I can give you 1,000 reasons why I loved it. And I really appreciate that part of the book.
Yeah, you really held that tension really well throughout the whole writing. You weren't like throwing the baby out with the bathwater or casting stones. You were honest, like so honest about your experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it reminded me some of what like Rachel Held Evans used to say, where she would talk about how her evangelical upbringing, while it caused a lot of her own discomfort and sadness and grief, and even some trauma. And you described church trauma really well as well in the book. But even within that, she was so grateful that she memorized scripture and that she had such a high regard for the Bible because of that upbringing. So it's like you're able to take the meat and spit out the bones, without trying to glamorize it in any way or silver line it. You were really honest, and I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you both. I mean, first of all, to be included with the late Rachel Held Evans in a sentence is like my greatest honor. I love her work, and I think about how much she has changed all of us. But it's interesting because I think the fact that I did not choose a side, that I did very purposefully seek to hold the both and hold that place of tension and paradox, has also been what's hardest for a lot of readers, because people want me to land in one of two camps. They want me to either love church camp and really throw away my entire argument, which is to say the book, or they want me to burn it all down. And they actually don't appreciate that I've landed in this middle spot. So I just go, I think that's what life is, though. I mean, I quote this in the book, but Madeleine L'Engle says, "I am all the many ages I have ever been." And in that way, I just go, evangelicalism. I mean, I am still an evangelical. I mean, I'm not really, like, don't use that as the quote that we put on top of the episode. I mean, but if I am all the many ages I have ever been, then I am the 10-year-old American Baptist kid. And I am the 16-year-old zealous, non-denominational kid. And I am the 25-year-old young lifer who just is desperate for everyone to know Jesus. And I'm the 46-year-old Episcopalian who is just going, oh, I am drawn to mystery and contemplation, and to not trying to convince people of this man named Jesus, but to instead accept the love that is present. But I am all these many ages, and I can show grace to myself for who I've been and who I continue to be on the journey.
Yeah, my husband and I met at a Christian camp. So church camp is very near and dear to my heart in a lot of ways. We were in our different churches went the same week ever since we were in junior high. And then we met when we were out of the high school and already like being counselors. So church camp there are both the memories of joy and an enlivening of my own faith and a greater understanding of the largeness of Jesus, because there were so many different denominations represented in this group. And at the same time, the guilt, the shame, especially around sexual and purity culture, all of those things are coalesced within my own body, within my own experiences. And you really expressed that very well in this book. Actually, like next week, we're taking our family to church camp for a family camp. And even that, like, being progressive people, being progressive pastors, and then going to a church or a church camp that they would consider themselves moderate. I would definitely say more on the conservative side. It's like there's all sorts of different things that we have to release and let go of and then process with our kids. And it's the same thing. It's like what is good and true, what continues forth throughout the ages, and what is it that is actually damaging and uncomfortable, that is just part of what it means to be human in this faith journey. But you chose not to have your kids go to any kind of church camp. Have you ever found any Episcopalian church camps that you would be curious about? Our church is sending our youth to an Episcopalian church camp that's very open and affirming, and some queer leaders that are there. And it's a different kind of church camp than I'm used to, but I think it'll be really neat.
Yeah, at this point, I haven't. And it is not for lack of trying. And just, to promote it to folks who might have children the same age, who are at that place. I do see so many places, particularly within the Episcopal and ELCA spaces. There's also a lot of UMC spaces that all within those camp ecosystem that are doing incredible things around it. And I'm also seeing a lot, the Post-Evangelical Collective, which is a national organization, is really having some cool conversations around it. That being said, I do feel like for my children, for my kids, we miss this critical window, first with the pandemic, in which that would have been a great time to start sending them. And now here we are, 5 years later. We were just doing the math over dinner last night. My younger son was like, wait, what year was that year that was just like everything was stolen, that it was all a time blip? He's sitting there going, what was it called again? I'm like, oh, the pandemic? He goes, yeah, the time warp. I'm like, how do you know that? And can we sing the song right now? Like, time warp. But the reality now, as I have two boys and as they've gotten older, the reality now is that I am not going to send my kids to camp by themselves. That would work potentially when they would have worked when they were quite a bit younger. But as teenagers and preteens now, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to send my kids to camp by themselves. I just think that is really not a smart thing for me as a parent to do, nor is it smart for them. But there is also still a question of their own racial identities. And the reality is that for a lot of camps, they are still predominantly white. And for my boys who identify either as mixed race or as Black, depending on the day, I don't want to send them, and I will not send them into an environment in which they are the only kids of color and or in which they are going to be tokenized. And so I think just as I'm doing my homework and saying and looking and going, okay, so what are the racial demographics of this place? I also am looking, I'm also thinking about who they are developmentally, and we're just not at a spot of doing that. So that's a very long answer to a short question, but that is currently where we are.
Well, I mean, I think that's a smart choice on your part, because church camps are primarily white. Well, I mean, even in, like you talk about in your book, it's white, heterosexual, evangelical, and to be of a person of color or be someone of the LGBTQIA plus community, you are going to not fit in at all. You're gonna, like you said, you're gonna either be the token of whatever. Well, within a race, if you're in the LGBTQIA plus community, you're going to be quiet because you're not going to be welcomed at all. And that's that's one thing that I think you talk about very well. And having those communities not being represented or being harmed in church camp.
Yeah. I mean, just responding to what you said, I mean, just as the book birthed out of the tension of the both and, it also birthed out of, I think, my own growing awareness of what was happening within these environments, in particular to three main people groups. And those three people groups were women, people of color, and the LGBTQ plus community. And so that was where a lot of my research and investigation began, was around and with those three populations, so to speak, to see if the harm that I was kind of ruminating on, going, okay, I think I'm onto something here, if that really was taking place and happening. And when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community, I mean, this is truly where I think some of the greatest harm has happened. And the reality is that for and with all of these camps, so many camps are privately funded institutions. They might be denominationally tied, but as religious institutions, they are private. And so as privately funded institutions, they are raising their own money. They are raising support to put these programs and offerings on. But with that, they're also allowed to essentially, they're allowed to discriminate. They're allowed to exclude because they fall under religious guidelines. And so that's where camps in their hiring processes can discriminate against queer identifying individuals. And or if someone is hired and then they're found out to be queer, LGBTQ plus identifying, they are allowed to fire them on the spot because of their religious standing. But it's the same. That's also where, and again, this may not be within ELCA or Episcopal camps, like we mentioned earlier, but within those camps that fall under the umbrella of white evangelicalism, that's also where they can put in place guidelines, certainly around heteronormity, but around expectations for transgender campers. Then, they can very much not honor they can only then adhere to the assigned sex at birth, instead of honoring who the individual is now. So I wanted that to, as a cisgender woman, I did want those stories told. And that was a big part of one of the chapters of chapter 3, was telling the stories of two individuals in particular, one woman and one non-binary individual, who have such fond, lovely memories of camp and who experience exclusion in the name of Jesus at the hands of camp.
Yeah. I was thinking about how you were talking you were mentioning in part of the book about like how the camp was set up where you'd show up on the first day and how you would preach these sermons that were just introducing Jesus and setting the scene and creating spaces of safety and kind of creating the story for the students. And then by like night 4 or 5 was like the super emotional, manipulative experience for these students to come to faith in Jesus Christ. And I'm curious, like, how have you been able to process that for yourself, the messages that you taught? Like, what have you held on to that was helpful for you, and what have you let go of that that you never want to share again or preach again?
Yeah. I mean, that's a loaded question. I'll start with this. I had 2 main launch parties, and at one of the launch parties, which happened 2 days after the book released, this woman at the very end, after we had the conversation, we had just time for the audience to ask questions. And this woman stood up and she said, "I just got your book in the mail yesterday and I read it last night." I'm sitting there going, "All right, you little overachiever." And she said, this was once my world too. But she said, "I think this is your atonement." Ooh. And the room went silent. We're all just sitting there going, "Oh my gosh." And she said, do you believe this is your atonement for that which you said that was wrong?" And I was like, whew. So I start with that image. And the reality is that just as I remember before I used to take the stage, I'd just be like, "God, thank you for the feet of those who proclaim the gospel," and I'm like pointing down at my little toenails. I'm like, "Thank you, Lord, for these feet. Blessed are the feet of she who proclaims the gospel." Mm. But the reality is that to the thousands upon thousands of children that I spoke to over the years, as a camp speaker, I was speaking for nearly 15 years. And the reality is that in that time, though, in all of these different environments, oftentimes harmful theology was employed. And this was harmful theology mostly around and through the theory of penal substitution, because that's just how we did it. And if we wanted kids to accept Jesus on the other end, then we needed something that was going to produce results. And so we told them that God loves them, that Jesus loves them. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And then it was almost like we'd flip the switch and just be like, "Well, but you're a sinner and you're worthless. And I don't know if we're allowed to cuss on the podcast, so I'm not throwing out expletives, but absolutely. I mean, you're a piece of shit," was what we were saying. You are absolutely, utterly worthless without God and or on your own. We're throwing out Romans 3 and Romans 6. And then the next day, "But don't you worry. Even though you are worth nothing, even though you are nothing and you are worthless, Jesus fills that gap." And so here you have penal substitution, which is being employed, which is an atonement theory that speaks of what God did through Jesus on the cross. But it's so heavy on debt. It's so heavy on anger. And therefore, it's heavy on the worthlessness of the individual, of human depravity. And so that's where, in big answer to your question, if I think too much about that, it grieves me. And I do want to atone for the harmful theology that I spoke and that I pounded into their heads, that I made kids and humans and whomever feel like they were just absolutely nothing. I do wish that I could atone in more ways than one for that. I wish I could just say to them, "You know what? You are loved simply because of who you are. And all of this, it doesn't matter, but you belong and you are beloved." And that's all I would say now.
What shifted for you? How were you able to see that for yourself, from going from sharing this rehearsed sort of gospel that you were handed? I mean, it's not like you came about that on your own. It was something that was preached to you probably throughout most of your brain development life. Like, what shifted for you to be able to deconstruct or to move past that, to be a person of belonging and inclusion?
I mean, I think there were a number of different things. I actually don't really like the word deconstruction, but I also recognize that there's been a deconstruction of my own faith. I think sometimes I call it more of a spiritual evolution, but in reality, it was a spiritual evolution that took place over 20 years. It was one of those, it took place when my first gay friend came out to me. And that man loved Jesus more than anyone else I knew. And that created tension. It happened when I worked for Young Life for nearly a decade, and I didn't agree with what I was being told to preach, but it was my paycheck and it was my job and it was my identity. And so I kept going and I wrestled. It happened when I went to seminary. I went to Fuller of all places. And I feel like this is always kind of quintessential for a lot of seminarians, but I'm like, Fuller was a big part of my spiritual deconstruction and or evolution, because I began to realize that there were more. There were other points of views. There were other atonement theories, however you want to say it. It changed when I married my husband, and began wrestling with my own privilege as a white woman, and began to see the world anew through his eyes, and later through the eyes of my children. So I think in and through and with these many things, they were all a part of my process. To the point that when I finally, the last class I ever took at Fuller was actually on Anglican theology. And the Episcopal Church is part of the Anglican, finds a home under the Anglican umbrella. And I remember taking this class at Fuller and just going, oh, this is my theology. This is what I believe. This is what I agree with. Like the fact that mystery was so embraced, this deep knowledge and love of the sacraments, which were never, they were, but in a very different way, a part of the American Baptist tradition. But feeling like I finally found what I had been looking for, on a very nerdy theological level. So when I finally landed in the Episcopal Church 4 years later, it was just like, oh, well, here we go. I'm home. And along the way, like what beautiful belonging is happening. So
just going back to the book and some of the stuff that, from my experience at church camp, I was only ever a camper. I was never a counselor or a speaker or anything like that. But one of the things that really struck home with me is this idea of telling you that you're a dirty, rotten sinner, that Jesus paid it all, so God could look through Jesus to see you, because he couldn't see you because you're such a sinner. But one of the things that you brought up in the book that I can relate to is this idea of like rededicating my life over and over, almost to the point where I felt like I had to be born again and again and again. And then this high of church camp, right? That when you're amongst all these people who are preaching to you and telling you how you can be a better human being, and then leaving church camp and then going into regular everyday life and then realizing that you can't hold on to this. And then that's where the guilt and the shame comes in, right?
Well, and it's like, I'm thinking right now, John, about how the camp is almost set up to do that. I remember the last day of camp saying, don't forget this mountaintop experience that you're having right now. Bring it back with you into your classrooms and back down the mountain. And as you go down the mountain, you might lose that high, and just keep fighting for the good fight for Christ, or whatever it was. And it's because when you are told, most people are told their whole life that they are a piece of shit. It's just the way, like, the world tells us that about ourselves over and over again. The last thing they need to hear from the people that have some sort of a connection with God or an in with Jesus for these teenagers is that they're a piece of shit. They need to be told that they are loved, and that when they go back down that mountain, that they aren't carrying their like brokenness and their garbage with them, that they're not carrying this sense of like shame, and that they'll never measure up without being here at this camp and, come back next year and get saved again. They need to carry with them that they are the beloved child of God before they've done anything right or wrong or said the right prayer or discussed the right things. But there is such, there's like this facade that happens at camp, for good or bad. I mean, sometimes you just have to create a space for people to encounter the Lord, and sometimes creating like a music or whatever. Just like being at the Episcopal Church, there's certain movements that happen within the service that draw our attention and our heart towards the heart of God. I don't think that that's a manipulation or a wrong. I believe it just helps us connect with something beyond ourselves. But within these sorts of spaces, it feels like they set teenagers up to recognize that they will never experience this feeling again until they get back there. Like that's where God lives. And they have to get back to that place. It's like a moneymaker that goes again and again. I don't know, put your money in and get the high again. And you wait to do that next year. And there could be good things with that, but most of the time it's just like, man, these kids need to be told that they are loved more than anything else. And I think that that's what you declare over and over again in this book, is that the times that you were told you were loved and you experienced love, those are the things that carried you forth. The times where you felt like, okay, I need to play this part. I need to be emotional or be overcome with my sin and be crying at the altar or shaking or whatever. Those are the things that we have to process, let go of, grieve in some ways. But yeah, that sense of love is more important than anything else. And the way that you wrote this is just absolutely beautiful, Cara. You weaved love into the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I just this morning was emailing with a guy named Jeff McSwain, and the two of you might be familiar with his name because I wrote about him in the book. But Jeff is one of the main voices that I highlighted in the chapter on sinfulness, titled "Dirty, Rotten Little Sinner." And McSwain he's a theologian. He was on staff with Young Life for decades. Until he was fired. And the reason why he was fired is because he was preaching a message of belonging before belief. And the reality, it was fascinating spending time with him, over the internet. But it was fascinating spending time with him because you could see in his eyes. We're sitting across the screen from one another, but we're all kind of looking at one another. But it was like you could just see like this, like squinty, glinty Jesus-ness, like shining through his eyes. I just remember going, oh, like you love so well. But the reality is that he was fired because he said to each of those kids sitting in that room, to literally the hundreds of kids that he spoke to week after week, he just kept saying, you already belong. You already are God's beloved. You are already in. The kingdom is already yours. God already loves you. And because he kept saying, because it is from this belonging, from this belovedness of who God already calls you, that we then accept that truth and then we believe. But for a lot of folks, that was where the big hiccup was. They were like, no. You need to make a verbal, humans need to make a verbal proclamation about this belonging before they're in. The reality too, though, is that the latter idea of believing before you belong, that is how you get conversion numbers. Because the kids are already going, oh, I'm already swimming in the pool of love. I'm already in. Then they're not going to have this big moment of conversion. And conversion is critical to the evangelical faith. So there's also that tension, which might be different if we find a home in other faith traditions now. But the reality is that within evangelicalism, conversion is one of the 4 quadrants in the Bebbington Quadrilateral. So if conversion is absolutely essential. I'm looking at my fingernails, realizing that I was just gardening and I need to go wash my hands a little bit more. I've got dirt in my nails. But if conversion is critical, then preaching belonging before belief is not going to produce the end results of that, because there's just acceptance instead of this active doing, because people are scared not to have it.
I had one of my biggest arguments online with somebody was because I had the audacity to say that you are already a child of God, period. Yeah. Just because you exist. And someone came at me with what you said. No, they have not, they're not saved. They have not been saved. So if they're not saved, they're not a child of God. And I was like, And we got into of course, this nice little heated Facebook argument about it, which, always go over so well.
Always a great place.
Hello, stranger on the internet.
We want to be able to measure the successes of a conversion. It's something that you can write home for, or you can write to the people that are in charge of Young Life or whatever the place is. If you can write it down, then it mattered. It happened. But I think of the 12 disciples, when Jesus called them, they followed him. So I guess there was a choice to follow him, but they didn't know what to believe. They had no idea about believing anything. They belonged to Jesus before they ever believed anything rightly, belonging fully before believing rightly.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't see a conversion process with almost anybody that Jesus talks to. You just don't. That's not part of it. It's letting them know they're loved and they belong for who they are.
It's almost like we've created this constructed process in the last 100 years with the rise of evangelicalism, because maybe it wasn't even a thing. I guess it was. If you look at historically, if you look at the revivalist movements, the Great Awakening and such, but yeah, it's what does it mean to then get back to the heart of faith, to get back to the heart of who God is, who is love? Which I think is also part of, a big part of what I'm arguing in the book is, what does it mean to get back to the heart of camp, and of what church camp should be instead of what they've oftentimes become.
Well, that brings up another sad part of it is, and that's the counselors and the people who are speaking. If they don't have that conversion process, or they don't get the numbers, then they're a failure. So y'all know this because you read the book, but right.
It was one of the most fascinating parts for me. One of the chapters, chapter 6, was supposed to be about the resurrection, and it essentially got hijacked by capitalism, transactionalism, and consumerism. And really it became a chapter largely about numbers. And there's a whole process as to how and why I got there. But the reality is that if the whole point of camp, and again, of these particular camps, if the whole point is conversion, of getting kids from point A to point B, from not believing to believing, from being lukewarm Christians to being on fire for Jesus Christians, then there has to be that transactional number that is counted. There has to be that conversion number that effectively goes to donors, that is communicated. That's my day job now. I communicate in quantifiable and qualifiable numbers how money is being used to produce good things through their dollars. But in that way, you also have this extreme pressure that is happening to staff members. And so that's where you get one of my favorite stories in the book. I was interviewing this young woman who worked for years at the Billy Graham camp called The Cove. And she worked there as a year-round employee, but also as a seasonal staff member. And when she was a seasonal staff member, which some of us might call a summer staffer, she looked forward to getting, all the staff hoped to get what was called the Outback Award.
Right.
And I remember talking to her and I'm like, what was the Outback Award? I've never heard of this. And she goes, oh, well, whoever had the most conversions at the end of a week got a $25 gift card to Outback Steakhouse. And I'm like, no way! Lemon onions for life. And she was so stoked. She's like, oh yeah, I got it a few times. But this is a camp in the Carolinas. This is a camp that purposefully started on Saturdays so that parents, this is within a very obviously homogeneously Christian ecosystem and environment. The camp purposefully started on Saturdays so that parents could drive their kids there and drop them off on Saturdays to get home in time for church on Sunday. So you're already talking about children who have been raised in a Christian environment more often than not. But they're all, like you were just saying, John, they're all reconverting or just converting again. They're coming to Jesus for the 35th time. And whether they're having this conversion moment because it really is happening, or because they feel pressure, or because they know they have to, or because they know that it is the desired, it is the action that is going to get the most accolades. I mean, there's so many different reasons as to why this could happen. Conversion is then happening, and then staff members, again, in turn, they're just trying to get bloomin' onions. They're just trying to eat out for a weekend. So
yeah.
Well, and you even wrote about how you came to know Jesus again, or at least somebody mentioned that you converted again, and your pastor was like, I baptized you a year ago. Was that you, or was that a different person?
Yeah, that essay. I was so hopeful we'd be able to include it. I actually wrote that years ago, and had just never had it published. But I was a 10-year-old at Camp Arowana, not to be confused with a word that starts with the word M, that's quite rhyming. We were named after an indigenous tribe in the Mount Hood National Forest called the Arowanas. So I had already, as a Baptist, you walk down the aisle, you were dunked. So I had already been baptized the year before, but I show up at camp. I grew up in Oregon, and Oregon winters, especially in the Mount Hood National Forest, are just cold. And so here we are, it's serious night, whatever we called it. The guitarist starts to play, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm getting really cold. I'm like, I want to go back into the lodge. I want my hot chocolate. I want my marshmallows. And so I bend over and I just start shaking, like, as in I'm shivering. Like I'm not having a moment with Jesus. I'm just shivering because I'm so freaking cold and I want to go back to the lodge. But all of a sudden I feel all these little camper hands on my back. And then I feel my counselor, and she's just starting to kind of like, if viewers were, or if listeners are watching, she's just starting to kind of like pet my back, just say, she's going, Cara, are you okay? Like a mother would. And pretty soon I realized, oh, they think I'm coming to Jesus. They think I'm having this moment that I'm crying. And I just start playing into it. And I continue to shiver, but I shiver and I pretend like I'm crying. And I was 10 years old. Like, I was totally playing into what they wanted for me. But I was a number that the camp received. The camp got to send a letter home to my pastor, and so yes, hence this conversation with Pastor Jack. And him just going, what are you doing? So.
I remember at camp when I was a kid, when I was in junior high, they had these little cards that the counselors would fill out with the name and the age of the student, and that they made the decision. Did they decide to follow Jesus for the first time, or did they rededicate their life? And I remember my camp counselor in junior high was just like forcing each student to prayerfully look at this card and to sign their name, because it would make everything feel better about like being included. And there was like so much pressure to what is the word? Not acclimate, but to be like everybody else in some way or another. And if everybody else was crying, I remember thinking like, why am I not crying? Why am I not like having this crazy emotional experience right now? What's wrong with me? It's a lot of pressure on kids to show up in a specific way, so that way you can be included in the group. Yeah. Well, this has been so good to talk to you about this book and about your experiences at church camp, and even just like hearing your experience of God. That a lot of people, they have a really hard church experience, or they grew up in a specific way, and then they deconstruct, or they disentangle or evolve out of church, which is, that's everybody's experience is different, and everybody's on their different journey. But I love that at this point in your journey, you are more aware of the mystery of the divine and drawn to those sorts of spaces that it's very refreshing to see that. Yeah. So thank you for sharing your heart with us. John, do you have any last thoughts or anything?
No, I just want to also say thank you for, taking the time to have this conversation with us. It's been an amazing conversation. Love talking to you.
Yeah.
Likewise. I know. I might just be driving north. We might have to hang out, y'all.
I would love that.
This is fun.
You can stay with us anytime. Woohoo! Well, Cara, your book is available now, right? Church Camp. Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So people can find it at all the bookstores, anywhere that you can buy good books. And then
we'll definitely link it
we'll link
in our
it.
notes.
And then you have an Instagram page. Is that where people can find you? Or you also have a website too, right?
Yeah, I would say the best places to connect, and I would love to connect, are either Instagram. I'm Cara Meredith Writes. And then I also write regularly on Substack, which is carameredith.substack.com.
Perfect. We'll include all that in the show notes. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.